Welcome to a sponsored webinar by SAP Concur, hosted by CPA Australia, Optimising Finance Processes to Support Business Continuity. My name is Melissa and I will be hosting this webinar and available for any troubleshooting questions you might have with your WebEx setup. We have people joining us from all over the country for today's webinar. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners from around Australia and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. Now I would like to introduce you to today's chair, Stephanie Janowska, who will facilitate the session. Stephanie, I'll hand over to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa, and welcome everybody. What a great topic we've got today. Stephanie Janowska, I'm Chair of CPA Australia's Centre of Excellence for Digital Transformation and also the Head of Finance Transformation for BlueScope Australian Steel Products. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our panellists today, Trent Bond, Penelope Venkia, Perry Abbott and Andrew Chapman. Let me tell you a little bit about them all, and they're putting on their videos. Thank you, everyone. Trent Bond is the Head of Finance at RSEA, who are Australia's market leader in workwear, PPE and safety equipment. RSEA has recently completed a finance optimisation project to automate expense management processes, and they are currently looking at automating their accounts payable processes. So welcome, Trent. Penelope is the Australian Financial Controller at MYOB, a brand familiar to all of us. They were early adopters of finance process automation. They had a fully automated employee expenses over 13 years ago and their invoice management process about 5 years ago. And Penelope has worked across both those projects, so we'll be able to share her insights today. Perry is the CEO and Managing Director of Frensurance, which is a leading digital insurance platform for partners such as Deutsche Bank, focusing on digitisation in the insurance industry. Perry is also my colleague on CPA Australia's Centre of Excellence for Digital Transformation. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from him today as well. And last but not least, Andrew, CPA, Head of Solutions Consulting at SAP Concur. Many of you know of SAP Concur because it provides an expense management solution known as Concur Expense. They also provide a range of other cloud-based applications to help businesses manage and have visibility to their expenses, travel and other invoices. He's been with Concur for 6 years and he's worked with many businesses to drive process change, and obviously he'll share his practical tips on how to do that. In terms of today, Q&A will be in the Q&A box, so please put any questions you have to all panellists. And if we don't get, we will allow some time at the end to answer some of those, but if we don't get to it, we'll ensure that we do, respond to any questions that have been raised. If you have any troubles, please use the chat box function today. Okay, we're going to kick off with some questions for Penelope and Trent. COVID has obviously absolutely changed the ways of working, and a lot of us are working now at home and changing the ways of working for finance overnight. Can you tell us a little bit about the fundamental changes it's meant for your organisation? So perhaps, Penelope, we'll kick off with yourself.
Yeah, sure. So we're always looking at ways to optimise our finance processes through automation, and I think that the last 10 months has been a very interesting time for everybody. We're constantly looking at new ways to do things. We use our own products internally, so MYOB Banklink and
Wonderful.
So I think we're supported by an excellent accounting team within the organisation who've been able to work remotely quite quickly and pivot very efficiently during this time.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And Trent, your thoughts on the changes that it's meant for your organisation and finance?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and probably a bit of the flip side to Penelope is that most of our team, certainly in AP and AR, were on desktops. So that was a challenge initially. And we sort of basically had an inkling maybe a week or two beforehand and had to turn it around really quickly. From AP, we still processed invoices manually, which is obviously not ideal. So we had to pivot from that really quickly. And we work in a business with rapid growth. So we're in a rapid growth environment and we move quickly. So that was the challenge in the first couple of weeks. But once we got into the rhythm of it and people understood where they were at and what they needed to do, people actually enjoyed it. So I've now got half my team that would like to stay working from home at least for 3 or 4 days. But then I've got half my team that just can't wait to come back to the office. So it's been a challenge. And the other big thing is keeping everyone's mental health in check. We have found ways to do that, but certainly initially that was a really big focus in making sure that the team were okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And the desktops, that would have been a challenge in itself. But no, good to hear that you've got that blended group now wanting to work different ways. And a question for Penelope, you know, all organisations are going to have, you know, some revenue impacts as a result of COVID, and maintaining cost control is really critical to this. You know, how have you used, you know, what have you used to cost control and support your decision making this year? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So the good news was a lot of our costs are already in Concur because we've been in Concur for a number of years. So with respect to expense, there's not a lot of travel, so there's decreased at that point. But with Invoice, it's been really interesting because we've got the history in the database, so we're able to go back and kind of revisit and quickly pivot and work out where we can cut costs and what we can do to, you know, review our budgets for the coming year. I think that, like, you know, aligned with Trent, we've had to focus on the mental health of our team as well, and we were able to just kind of pick up and move and start working from home really easily and quickly. So it's been great.
And the importance of transparency. Never has there been, you know, a bigger focus on the transparency of our cost to ensure that we're really, you know, spending where we need to. So thank you for that. We're going to move on to a theme of bringing forward digital transformation. So Trent, a question for yourself. You've recently invested in some finance transformation. What drove you to reviewing and optimising your back-end processes? And do you have a roadmap for that? And was it before COVID? Is it now? And did it and if you did have one, did it change? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me. So I'm 10 months into the role. So I started in early December. So fair baptism of fire. And when I first started, I ranked each of my departments out of 10 in 3 key categories. So the first one was world-class. And when I talk world-class, that is really around the automation and ability to deliver a world-class efficient system. The second one was around L&D, so how we developed our people and how we made better use of what we currently had. And then the last piece was value to the business. So did we deliver value to the business across the three or four areas that I look after? And when I first started, certainly world-class out of 10, we were a 3 or 4. As I mentioned, we still had desktops. We processed invoices manually. And we knew straight away at that point that things needed to change. So we developed a roadmap really early on. And the whole thing around that roadmap was we needed to build a business for 2025. It wasn't about building a business for now. It was all about building a business for 5 and 10 years' time, encapsulating the expected growth of our business. So my finance roadmap really mirrored the business's roadmap and the business's 5-year plan. So COVID certainly enhanced that and brought that forward. But there was certainly, there's a lot of work in this space that we needed to do, and COVID forced that. The other thing that COVID forced, certainly from a Concur expense management perspective, was you also have staff changes as a result of COVID, and people that were looking after certain processes were no longer there. So it really forced us to come up with something that, instead of hiring someone else to look at that, how can we do this automated? How can we do this more efficiently? And that's probably another thing that COVID helped bring forward.
Excellent. I love the alignment with the business strategy, but also that automation first mindset. Yeah, putting processes into automation really critical. So thanks for sharing that. And Penelope, I know your organisation, MyOb, has been early adopter of finance automation. And what drove the decision originally, and what business challenges was the business? What were you trying to solve? What problems were you trying to solve through that?
Yeah, I think you touched on it earlier, Steph. It's transparency, to be honest. Having to go to a folder to find out what we were, if we were looking at invoices, and we needed ways to simplify and to not only provide transparency within the finance team, but also out in the business. We didn't want to be managing through spreadsheets anymore, so we basically initially partnered with Concur to implement Expense, which moved us away from paper forms, submissions. We set up the credit card feed from our banking partner, and that just removed the dependency on the traveller to actually put their expenses in to the system early on. Having the Concur app allows the travellers to be able to, apply or at least upload copies of their receipts while they're travelling. They don't have to worry about coming back to the office. It gives us transparency over month end as well, so we're not relying and having to contact people to constantly request information from them. We can actually see it visually regardless of whether they do their expense claims or they don't do their expense claims. And similar with invoices, come into a centralised accounts payable inbox, gets uploaded, the manager sits on it for a couple of weeks. We've got that visibility, so it's just fantastic.
Yeah, really, really great to hear. Again, business-led, but also making your life a lot easier, so you can spend the time working with the business. I really love that. Andrew, when we talk about optimising processes, are we only talking about automation in your view? What's your view?
I would say no. I think automation is part of an optimization project, but when you're looking at optimizing a process, you're really looking at making that process the best process it can be for your business. So automation and technology certainly play a part in that, but it doesn't finish there. You really need to look at it, as Trent said before, look at the processes within your business, say, are they sufficient? Do we need to look at those? Can we leverage technology to really make them as efficient and as practical as possible? But really look at it from a business point of view and saying, is this process giving us all we want? I think, Penelope just made a great point. You could have a fully automised AP process, but unless the CFO can go in and see where all the invoices are or, report on expenses that haven't been submitted, it's not really optimised because it's not giving us the information we want. So I think although automation is part of optimising a process, it's not the be-all and end-all. And we still need to look at that process from a business point of view and say, is it giving us all we need?
Thank you for sharing that. I love it again, business-led from the lens of the business. So we'll move on now to Perry. Perry, what trends are you seeing as a result of COVID? And have you noticed anything different, any more push towards digital transformation? Love to hear your views, Perry.
I think there's two kind of activities happening. One is in kind of the consumer space. So when you have this previous kind of existence of an alternate route for people that kind of escape through the divide and transform what you do to the customer. And I think, one of the really positive things that's happening at the moment is there's an opportunity for many organisations to get in there and shift customers to a digital channel without them going to another supplier or becoming disgruntled with you as a service provider. So they're taking away kind of all the other options, particularly the least optimal options as well to obtain services or buy products, in particular the insurance space. It's been a really good opportunity to kind of get people digital, get people doing things online, get people interacting with you online, kind of, especially for your last 10% of your customer base that really existed, that kind of had no choice, which has been really great. I think, from a business perspective, I think, what we're seeing is, people start talking about kind of life after COVID and what the corporate world would look like after life after COVID. And I think it's a world in which kind of this concept of being able to support a digitally distributed model of probably running your business is something that's going to become a normal kind of corporate risk management expectation. It's not going to be, this special project you run to kind of do a digital transformation. It's going to be a checklist saying, is this business ready to run in a digitally distributed state? Which means, can my employees effectively wake up in the morning and do their job from home without having to come to the office? And I think what people have found is, this kind of digitally distributed model of kind of doing business is not just about kind of managing, for the next pandemic or, for the next few months or however long under these circumstances, but it kind of deals with a whole range of risks. I mean, it deals with the train broken down in the morning or the car accident on the motorway. It makes organisations more flexible and agile, and I think it's here to stay, and it's here to be kind of very much the norm.
It's probably taught us to be more adaptable and more resilient than we thought we were, right? So,
I think it's also meant that people, the concept of putting some of these projects forward has become a lot easier. Like, if people are asking the questions about, why we're doing this, it's like, when are you going to get it done? When are we going to make this process digital? So, I think it's been a great impetus for especially a lot of guys in the finance team who want to do a lot of these things for a long period of time. So, that's great.
Excellent. Thank you, Perry. Andrew, where do you start? How do you prioritise? What do businesses overlook?
Yeah, look, I think everyone's going to start at a different point depending on where you are. There's no sort of magic bullet and you say, hey, start with this process. I would, if I was looking at an organisation, I'd start by doing a little bit what Trent was saying before. Go through your processes and rank them, and have a look at, which is bad, which is working, which is the one that has the highest risk for us, and then maybe look at that. Risk is something traditionally we haven't really looked at a whole lot. As accountants, we sort of have these processes that have been in place for a long time, and we do the same thing every month that we did last month. But suddenly, we have an upheaval now. We're all in different situations. It's a great time to really look at that with that risk lens and say, actually, is this process offering us a risk? Is it something we can improve? And then make a decision on that. And you might make a decision on saying, okay, actually, I'm not going to tackle the biggest problem we have. Maybe I'm going to tackle a smaller problem. Get a win on the board, prove to the powers that be that we can actually deliver some results, and then we'll tackle a bigger problem later on. But everyone's going to be individual in that, I think.
All at different parts of the journey. But to the other panellists, what are your hot tips for getting started with finance transformation and bringing forward some of these process improvements? How do you create that compelling case for change? And perhaps I'll start with Trent.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was taking myself off mute. It's an interesting one for us, and I'm really interested in Penelope's version of this because we're a smaller business than Mild. So from our perspective, we're really small, agile, and that's the success of RSEA, is how quickly we've been able to grow and move fast. And the biggest thing in doing that is creating a perception of value. So you have to create some perception of value in your business. And I think I want to touch on what Andrew just said then is you actually need to get your license to operate. And what I mean by that is you need the business to trust that you will deliver what you say you're going to deliver. And the more and more that you start to do that, the more and more trust and license to operate builds within the business. And you can then really tackle whatever you want to tackle because everyone has real faith and trust that you're going to get it done. How you do that, it's all about business partnering. People see finance as just the guys that do the numbers each week, each month, but you've got to actually prove to them that you can add value to their job. And I think that's the biggest thing is going back and saying, well, I can actually, this key stakeholder, I can add value to your job because I'm saving you, if it comes to expenses, you can take a photo of your receipt on your phone and it's uploaded instead of having to go back to the office and print it, do whatever you need to do. So it's how you can create value for the specific stakeholders and provide that business partnering.
Awesome, love it. Penelope, your views?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the biggest tip I could give is around getting your biggest noise makers on board as your early adopters. So those people that constantly every month come to you and say, oh, I can't believe I have to give you this report again. With all of my receipts attached, and you're constantly going back and saying, you haven't given me this receipt. Get them on board, tell them that we're going to make your life so much better. And a lot of people like to live in the digital world now. So being able to move those people online really quickly and get them to submit their expense reports in a more timely manner is fantastic. I think the biggest problem we had initially was we had a couple of managers that were a little bit too keen, and they were submitting weekly reports instead of like once a fortnight or once a month. And you've got to kind of weigh up your cost of that as well. Seek in your executive input early. Make sure, excuse me, that you're getting approval. Excuse me. From the CEOs and I think the speed of execution is really important too in this day and age. So you want to be able to ensure that the message you get going out there with is actually going to be delivered in a timely manner, or else you lose the traction that you get behind you. So, absolutely. Early adopters and the ones that hate doing their expenses the most are the ones that you want to get on board early.
Love that. Perry, have you got anything to add?
I could only that, I think that the balance between, implementing these sort of and I talk about, this stuff in terms of digitalisation, in terms of that first step of actually getting rid of all the paper, and the second part of kind of adding the efficiency optimisation piece. So just the digitalisation piece, which, surprisingly, a lot of organisations and commercial organisations in Australia as well aren't in that position. I think that first piece is saying, well, we can deal with the flow of information for our organisation completely electronically with the absence of paper is going to become a very much kind of corporate risk hygiene issue for organisations. Like, if you can't do that, if you can't run your business without kind of opening 1,000 envelopes every morning, potentially you're putting the organisation in a massively risky position. And I think that changes the whole value behind business cases going up for making these sort of changes. It looks more like a health and safety investment rather than the finance team want to do this really special thing with SAP. I think the conversations will shift in this space.
No, really good. All of you have touched on change management being really critical. Yeah, taking people on the journey, showing something with speed, also showing value, and a changing business model is really quite a really critical piece to this. Let's move on to, because you touched on it, Perry, improving controls and efficiency and getting better insights through process improvements. I have a question. I'll open it to Penelope and Trent first. What advice do you have on the people side of process optimisation? So I think you've both touched on it earlier. How do you develop new ways of working and really not just a new tool to do the old stuff new ways?
I think, just be patient with your team, but be persistent as well. Let people fail forward. So, allow people to make mistakes and show them that through those mistakes you're actually making their lives better, easier. And make sure that you're listening to the feedback from the people that are actually out there helping you bring this process optimization in. If they're telling you that something is taking them longer, you need to actually try and help find a solution for them and work with them to find that solution. I don't travel a lot, so for someone like me, it sounds like a great idea because I want to get everything in the cloud and have it all there for me to be able to go and report off. But for somebody who's constantly out of the office and constantly traveling, for them it's a real burden, this admin burden. So you've got to get them on board early and show them that it's actually going to be easier for them. And I know that I travelled to Sydney last year. Would have loved to have done it this year, but COVID. And when I was at the airport, before I actually caught the plane back, I put through my expense claim and submitted it because it was just, so much easier to get it. I didn't have to wait to go back into the office again to do it. And I often talk to the team members out there that make a lot of noise and say to them, like, if you keep track of it throughout the day and just do little steps throughout the day when you're in the cab or when you're waiting in reception for your next meeting, it's going to make it easier for you. And Concur does a great matching as well. So you've got your expense that you're loading with your receipt and you're matching it in with your credit card. You're not having to double up on things. So it's just getting them on board.
Really great. And Trent, yourself?
Yeah, pretty similar. I think the main thing for me is discovering the why. So why you're doing it and why it's adding value to the specific stakeholders, because that is really the way that you buy their engagement. If they completely understand why it benefits them and why we're doing it, then you're going to get a pretty good outcome from them. I think Penelope touched on it a bit earlier as well, is finding the business agitators. They're always out there. You've just got to find them and understand why they agitate. And getting them on board in the process as well, because if you can turn them around, you're going to be really successful, because they're clearly the ones that make the most noise, but they're also the ones that can give you the biggest benefit internally if they're supporters of whatever you're trying to do.
I love that. Turn your adversary. I don't think I'm saying that right. Make them advocates. All the haters, make them advocates. Yeah. And I love the comment about making mistakes, because it always happens, doesn't it, in these types of projects. A question for Perry. Perry, what insights can you share in terms of, where technology can take finance leaders to gain better control, better visibility, and obviously make life easier for employees? What's your views on that?
Sounds like an exciting place to be in. Look, I think there's, and I'll take a bit of a macro view on this. And if I look at all the kind of the research that's kind of going past us at the moment about what's kind of shifting, in the workplace, and it comes down to some more fundamental things about the relationship of trust between employees and employers. In that, when you suddenly send your workforce home for 6 months and you say to them, I want you to manage potentially the most costly resource on your own. So they're basically getting up every morning and they're deciding how to spend the resource of their time without any supervision. That's a massive rapid transformation in kind of workplace culture and trust. So what it's exposed is it's kind of, it's probably exposed, the lazy employees as much as it's exposed the lazy leaders. So it's, I wouldn't underestimate, and there's a lot of research that's coming out about this. I wouldn't underestimate how that's going to challenge how these sort of models of kind of process control and visibility and are going to be viewed in the future. So if I could trust the employee to kind of get a really good job done, and they've done better than they've done at work at home, what are we kind of doing wrong in other spaces in the organisation? Like if I can trust them to manage their day, why am I challenging them on the fact that they bought something from the minibar on a 3-day trip? Like, does that culturally reconcile together anymore? So, I think it's probably a great time, in terms of control, to look at the balance between control and efficiency and say, well, let's have a go at going a bit higher in terms of how we control expenditure, through these systems. So, let's not worry about what they spend on the trip. Let's just set a budget for the trip and let them spend within it, and you let the AI tools kind of work out whether, they've done anything that's kind of outside policy. So I think, less hands-on, less control, more reliance on the employee to kind of manage against probably more macro indicators rather than all the micro-transactional kind of indicators we've managed against before. And I think that it's this shift in this trust bit. Like I wouldn't, when the world goes back to whatever the new normal looks like, I wouldn't underestimate what that looks like and what employees what their expectations are around that.
So the infusing of trust through our governance, and how do we, make sure that it's embedded in there. I think that's a really thought-provoking idea as well, Perry, because that next normal is going to be probably uncomfortable for lots of people. Yeah.
I think for some CFOs, like the next step forward, they can probably stand up with a bit more confidence and go with more aggressive models than they could in the past, because they have something to reference where they never had in the past. They look, well, they did this really well. Why can't we let them have a go at doing this? I think that it's a powerful reference point to go forward to do something really.
Excellent. Kind of a follow-on question for you, Andrew. With working from home, the new normal, How can we ensure the right controls are in place when, everyone's everywhere?
Yeah, I think, look, there's certainly been a challenge for a lot of our clients over the last probably 6-7 months. In that, they used to have a manual process that involved someone walking a piece of paper around and getting signatures on it, or possibly sending it in the internal post. And suddenly that process was no longer available to them because no one was in the same spot. It certainly became a challenge to people. And we've seen some clients sort of overcome that challenge with email, which is not necessarily the most secure forum. What I would say is there's a lot of technology out there that has been built really around best of breed controls and compliance, and being able to leverage those in a sort of distributed environment is going to be super helpful for people. When we look at some of our systems, we have things in there like duplicate invoice indicators, duplicate expense indicators. We can make sure that the invoice goes on an appropriate workflow when we can't avoid that. We can look at all those elements to actually really make sure we are genuinely meeting the controls that we have in place. We do find in a lot of manual environments there might be a control in place, but often it's overcome by simply having an EA or something like that sign off on a report when they're not actually meant to be doing that. By putting the system in place and having it secure with two-way authentication and things like that, we can really ensure that process is doing exactly what we want it to do. So I think by leveraging that technology, it gives us a great advantage on making sure that those controls are in place and they are appropriate for the business as well.
Yeah, really good point about embedding the governance in the tool. So it's not like this thing that you do on the side. It's very much front and centre of your ways of working. So I love the duplicate invoice one. That's a great one.
Yeah.
So, Trent, I've got a question around quick adoption and minimal disruption. As you're considering your finance projects, one of the things top of mind would have been business disruption. How you mentioned it, how important is that speed of adoption and the change management around new processes? And what steps have you taken that might be helpful for others to know?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and this is probably the finest balancing act that you have. So I've got a saying that perfection is the enemy of progress. So you have to find that really fine line between getting something that is perfect initially and straight away versus getting something adopted quickly. And I think probably, as I mentioned before, the success of RSCA is our ability to move quickly and be agile. And we've really prioritised getting something happening as opposed to making it perfect straight away, because you have the ability to perfect it or improve it as you go, as you get feedback. And people are willing to do that. People know that the system they're getting straight away may not actually necessarily be the system that it ends up being. And it also encourages people to give feedback. If you say that straight up, hey, we think this is fantastic, but please provide us feedback. And if they see you making those changes, once again, you're bringing people on board. So that's really something that you need to consider, is that fine line between a system that functions as it should, but also a system that's perfect. So that's probably the biggest thing there. For us, the expense management side was a really easy win, because people went from doing things manually to doing things on their phone in 2 seconds. So it was never going to be a disruption problem. But as we attack the AP automation piece that we're looking at now, that's going to have a different conversation between speed and perfection versus the conversation I had for the expense portal. So it's just interesting, and it's measuring what your tolerances are.
Yeah, a bit of an art and a science, but also people know how to use phones, but changing a whole AP is going to take a little bit more change management, but good to have a different approach for those two different processes. So question for Perry and then Andrew. Lots of businesses adopting technology because they had to, like Zoom and Teams and WebEx and all these other online tools. Has it made our staff more adaptable to change? And how important do you think that is in terms of our future? So Perry, perhaps you first.
Look, I think what's happened is, the way employees kind of deal with change is different, and the way that they change their day to accommodate those sort of changes is different as well. So I think, probably the shift is, it's almost, people started talking about this concept of kind of over-implementation, where, we're prescribing too much in terms of how employees need to take certain changes. And I think there's the general themes coming out is that there's a pullback from that. It's like, and it's a bit, if you look at it in the context of Zoom, we said to you, like, go and join the Zoom call, to meet with your team every Monday morning. And most people worked out after the first week not to sit behind a window. Like, they worked that stuff out without us having to write a prescriptive list of, like, how to do a Zoom call. So I think over time we kind of underestimated, teams' ability or employees' ability to kind of fill the white spaces with implementation. They're smarter than they may have been taken granted for, and they can be trusted more than they maybe could have been, than we should have in the past. So, rather than pushing standards, I think the way forward in terms of implementation is actually giving them more space to fill the way things are rolled out with the way that they want to do it. Which is if you say that out loud, it's actually quite a terrifying thing. We're not going to tell you how many onions to put on the burger. We're going to give you the recipe and the ingredients, like George Columbaris does with cooking at home on a Friday, and we're going to let you make it in your own kitchen. And as long as it tastes good, we don't really care. And I think there's we've learned to implement different ways, and it will change the way it's done. The amount of risk that we're willing to take on board in implementation, the amount of concerns about how precise that implementation is, I think will shift. We've realised we can actually slam things in pretty fast, and our people kind of deal with it, and they fill in the gaps pretty well. So I think there's a pretty exciting kind of world coming forward in terms of how to make a lot of things happen a lot faster than they ever did before.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Yep, the experiment has made us much more adaptable, and we can fill in those blanks more than we thought. So, Andrew, yourself?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think that although we've been adaptable to change in the last 7 months, probably more than we have been previously, it doesn't overcome the fundamental human psychology that people are always afraid of change, especially when it comes down to your job. So if I come in and say to you, hey, I'm going to automate your job, your first reaction is going to be fear. So when you're looking at that from a finance professional's point of view, I think you've always got to have that in mind. When you're looking at automating someone's job or automating what they do, you can't just go in and tell them, hey, I'm going to automate it. You need to sort of give them a roadmap to change. Okay. So yeah, we're going to automate this process. And first of all, you're going to be involved in the project. But then after the project finishes, this is what your job is going to look like. This is the changes we're going to make. And really giving people the idea that although change is happening and it is going to be disruptive and it's probably going to be uncomfortable, in the long run, it's going to end up being a good thing for you. One of my clients famously said to me, no one comes to work to input data. And it's saying, yeah, okay, cool. We're going to take that element away from you, but we're actually going to give you some more responsibility over here in a more value-adding area, and that's going to obviously make your job more interesting and make you, feel like you're giving more to the company, and it's going to be a positive experience rather than just coming in and saying, yeah, right, we're going to change, and this is what we're going to do, and make everyone fearful for their jobs.
But I think, Andrew, it's interesting that people who are currently doing some of those jobs, like they're slamming the data in, they're standing over the scanner, scanning over a second. The people that are doing those tasks inherently probably have some concern about the viability of their role. They're going, well, I want to see that there's something new coming along that I can be involved in, because I know that, sitting there, photocopying 1,000 CAD charge vouchers a month or scanning them isn't something that's sustainable in the future. You're very right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what people can achieve when you give them the space to do it. I don't think anyone goes out there trying to find someone for a job that's not very good at it. We try and find the best people we can, and often when we found the best people, we need to make sure that they're actually achieving something and feeling they're adding value.
So it's funny because talking to a couple of good mates of the CFO, a couple of those people that kind of were slaving over the scanner, this is tough. have been available. We've redeployed them to do other things. In the last 6 months, they've actually discovered new jobs because they couldn't go to the office, they couldn't get near the scanner, it wasn't available.
Yeah.
Like and some of them found new ways of doing what they did before themselves. And this comes down to this kind of horrible email thing. I said, well, you take a picture of your receipt and email it to me. And then suddenly you go, well, I'll stop taking a picture and emailing it to you, put it in the Concur app. You know, like it's just been very interesting, like the shifts in behaviour that people have taken on their own accord.
Comes back to that adaptability, but Andrew, I think, you know, the uncomfortable but yet positive change is a really important one as you go through any significant finance process change or optimisation or transformation. So thanks, guys, for sharing. Penelope, often misconception about how long finance process change can take and how many resources it requires, and you touched on it before around value, time to value. So how quickly were you able to implement some of your improvements and experience that time to value?
Yeah, so we noticed it as soon as we went live, to be honest, especially with Invoice. Expense was a long time ago, so probably better to talk to the Invoice implementation. But it took us about 3 months end to end from the initial, you know, what are we going to do and how are Concur going to help us implement, through to actually training the managers and going through the test scenarios and going live. And within that 3rd month, we were able to, for the first time ever, produce a report for our soft accruals, or hard accruals actually, the ones that had come in for our invoices that were unpaid, and we were able to actually give that to the accounting team and say, you know, we need to accrue for these expenses. Previously, we'd actually go out to the managers and they'd have to fill out spreadsheets, and we'd get 50 of them back and we'd have to consolidate them. No one wants to do that. But the other thing to call out was having the right people working on the project within the accounts payable team is really important. So we did have an accounts payable officer at the time that was against moving to online. They were quite happy with the status quo that we had at the time, and they became a bit of a detractor throughout the project. So we had to be agile, and we had to actually move away, and we sold it to her that, you know, you continue doing what you're doing. That's fantastic. You're doing a great job. You keep putting the invoices in while we have this project out on the side. And we had a junior person working on the testing and, you know, going through and calling out any issues and process control changes that we needed to make. And throughout that project, we went live, which was fantastic. And on the weekend after we went live, the junior person came up to me and said, I've built like 9 reports for month's end. And I was blown away by it. And I think that's the thing, like if you can get the right people on the project and you get the engagement early on, they go over and above. And it's just been fantastic. So I can't express enough how important it is to have this stuff online somewhere and not in a paper form. And coming from a software company, you know, we do everything we can to have it in the cloud, and we work towards constantly reviewing our documentation and changing things. The other thing to call out is there's a lot of changes that are going to come in 2021, right, from the ATO around reporting and around proving how quickly you're paying your vendors. So I think having a system that can actually help you with all of that reporting is just amazing.
Love it. You're future ready. You're getting future ready. And I really love that mindset matters, yeah? So you've got to pick the right people for the team and take others along on the journey. We're going to now, I've got a very open-ended question for the panel. And what general advice would you have for those on the call today around how to optimise finance processes to support business continuity? I might even go crazy and let you say anything else, but I'd love to start with Trent first, if I may.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Just do it. Be flexible but brave. It takes bravery to do this because you're putting yourself out there with a new process. But, you know, people want you to do that. If you fail, you fail. But just be brave and attempt to do it.
Love it very much around courage, taking it on. Andrew, your views?
Yeah, I'd just say don't wait for things to go back to normal, because once they go back to normal, it'll be a new normal. It'll all be different. So, don't sort of sit down and wait. Be proactive. Do something now.
Take it into your own hands, yeah? Go for it, because it's probably going back to normal is probably not a thing either, right? Yeah? So if we can move on to Perry, your views.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that, now's the time to do it if you're going to do it. As I said, I think kind of the stock standard digitisation will become a corporate governance checkbox. Like it'll be something if you're fronting the audit committee, the CFO, explain to shareholders that you're ready and prepared to deal with the sort of scenario again. So it's you're not going to have to build a massive business case to get some of these things up. They're going to become corporate hygiene.
Yep. Take it, get on with it, basically, yeah? Yep. Thank you, Perry. And Penelope? What advice?
I'd recommend that if it feels overwhelming, break it down and just bite off small chunks. Don't do it all at once. Just make sure that the team are well supported throughout, any project, and always look at the most junior person in the team to be the one that might provide you with the most insight into a change. There's so much opportunity out there at the moment to really go through this process and get online and simplify and improve. And I don't think we're going to go back to the old normal. There's definitely going to be a new normal. I know we're looking at, working from home and everything. I started working from home, I think, about 12 years ago, 1 or 2 days, and I actually had to sign a, document. And isn't it amazing that this year, everyone just, Friday we walked into the office and the whole finance team knew something was coming. We were all in there and we said our goodbyes, and then, over the weekend, Sunday, that's it, announcement, you can't go back in, and we all had our laptops at home and we were ready to go. And if anything, it's actually been a positive change for us. We are looking forward to going back to the office. We can't wait. We've got a new office in Richmond. I also enjoy working from home, and there's opportunity out there with, getting people interstate or overseas. You don't necessarily have to be in, a specific office space now to work for an organisation. So I think that's exciting as well. One of the other things I didn't call out is that we actually manage both our Australia and our New Zealand invoicing through our Australian office in Melbourne. Through this period, we've been able to actually engage some of our New Zealand finance support team in helping out with any additional work so that the team can have some, well-deserved breaks, because it is quite a trying time for everybody, and we can focus on the mental health of our team. It's just go get on with it and just do it.
And then our last one just shows the teamwork that comes out in all of us as we experience this. And your earlier points around, making sure you chunk it down into manageable bites and, getting the early adopters, which you've reinforced several times, I think is just amazing. Well, for the panellists, we're going to move to some Q&A, but I'm going to encourage the audience, if you've got any burning question for our 4 panellists, please pop it into the Q&A now. And the first one's directed to you, Penelope. Someone would like to know, one of our audience would like to know more about uploading cab and travel receipts, which I'm sure a couple of people could talk to. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, there's a Concur app. You literally go into the app, you take a photo, you fill out a date, put a little bit of a business purpose in there, and it just saves it there. And then when the credit card expense comes in, because you've got your date, your amount, your vendor, it auto matches. So it's pretty cool. It gives you the opportunity to go and change it before you submit it if you need to. We actually get people to submit a photo per expense type. When we first went live, people were actually going and scanning their receipts onto a report, and we asked them not to do that. And over the years, we trained them to do it per expense type. But yeah, it's super easy. It's just you're in the app, take a photo.
Yeah. No, appreciate that, because a person said they actually use e-ticket, which sounds a little different to what you're talking about. So
I think there's some additional add-ons that you can get, and that's one of the other benefits with Concur is that you're not locked into one particular solution. You can go out and look at other add-ons that Concur offer.
Thank you for that. So the question here is, considering some employees' jobs may potentially be taken by automation or AI, how do you deal with that conflict during the automation of processes? So,
can I answer that one?
Yes, go for it.
I actually disagree that people's jobs get taken away per se. It's just their focus shift. They still need to do the work. People still need to review things. There still needs to be governance. It's just that you're shifting it from the mindset of I'm going to go and process and scan and upload into where now I've actually got the data that I need to do my job, and I can present it to the board in a way that, you know, gives them the transparency that they need. You also don't have people coming to you asking you for information anymore. They go self-service. It's just fantastic. So you're just moving, you're shifting the work. I'd be keen to hear what the panelists.
Yeah, you're repurposing. Sorry, who would like to? Andrew, is that you?
Oh, look, I can jump in there, yeah. Unless you have an AP team of 50 people sitting in a big warehouse somewhere, it's probably not going to be an overnight reduction in staff. You know, when you automate a process, as Trent was sort of saying, you know, sometimes it's just good to get it in and have that roadmap of the change you want to do over a couple of years. And if you do a process like that, yeah, you might find that in the long term your headcount requirement isn't as big, but it'll be a gradual change, and you'll probably have some natural attrition of people moving on, and you don't have to necessarily replace them. But yeah, it really is focusing on jobs changing rather than just a complete elimination of staff. As I said, unless you have a massive AP team. We don't see that very much in Australia anymore. Most of the companies that sort of have 50 people in AP have outsourced it to somewhere else anyway. So, yeah, it's normally a couple of people and their jobs will be changing rather than just no longer being there.
And I mean, there's a lot of merit in saying, well, you know, AP is a very internally focused process. So how do we push more resource into kind of the customer space and the AR space in terms of billing and receivables and where we actually want to put our people, you know, in front of our customers in the best experience rather than, you know, messing around with bits of paper every day. Like there's a lot more value to the organisation.
Yeah, refocusing. Trent, anything to add to that question?
No, I completely agree with what everyone said. Just it doesn't necessarily mean that people's jobs disappear, and you've just got to get them on the roadmap with you, and they've just got to buy in.
Yeah, really good. Task elimination, not necessarily role elimination, probably the way we describe it as well. There's a really interesting question. How do you bring the dinosaurs into the remote working space? I have many who say cannot touch them, they cannot manage them, and a really nice leadership question. I can volunteer someone if you like. Andrew, do you want to speak, do you?
No, I've just got to fly.
Okay.
Yeah, look, it's very rarely these days do you find someone that can't use a mobile phone. You might occasionally, but even you know, my mum who's 77, 78, she's well adverse to using a mobile phone to buy things and you know, email me constantly about the things I'm doing wrong. So yeah, it's one of those things when you sort of say to someone, yeah, we're going to move to technology, and in fact you're just going to be able to do it on your phone. It becomes a lot easier for people to handle, I think. So yeah, mobile adoption is something at Concur that we've been pushing for like the last 10 years. And the reason is because people love using their phones. They find them less daunting. The apps are built around being far more intuitive. And yeah, we really find that helps. You know, so yeah, just sort of focus people on that and they tend to enjoy it. The other thing I'll say is, you know, I'm remembering back in the 90s, I don't know if anyone's that old, but, you know, if you remember an accounting system back in the 90s, they were horrible. You know, we had green screens, you know, lots of text, things that didn't make sense. If you didn't make the right input, it just all failed and it didn't tell you why. We've had a big change away from that. And now software development, I know at Concur, we spend about a third of our research dollars on actually making the system intuitive so it's easy to use. and we've had some really big developments there. So, yeah, we find these days that the training requirements are a lot less than they used to be, and people actually do start enjoying the system. But it will come with a caveat, and that's to say, when you're designing your system, design it with the users in mind. Don't make it too onerous.
Love it. Anyone else like to add to that question? How do you bring people into the remote working space? If you can't touch them, you can't manage them. Anyone want to mention? Go, Perry.
I think it comes down to a bit of this, this concept that there has been, this process has kind of unearthed the lazy employees and the lazy leaders. And potentially, the lazy leaders are the ones that have actually looked out and seen all these people tapping away at a keyboard and not thought this is productive. It requires a great level of skill to kind of manage a team based on, what they're delivering, but also, how engaged are they, how are they feeling. So it's required a far more mature leadership set of skills than probably you have with someone, sitting there, looking over their 28 employees, whacking away a keyboard. Like it's required a better leader. Bottom line.
Yeah, no, really critical. I'm just conscious of time. There is a couple of Q&A questions that we didn't quite get to, but we'll circle back to them at the end. If anyone is interested in SAP Concur and learning more about it, please put it in the chat, and the team will be in contact with you. But from myself, I'd like to thank all panellists today for sharing their insights. I love the message around being courageous, about just giving it a go, breaking it down into manageable parts, trusting our people, putting people in the middle, and really importantly, that people are much more adaptable than you think they are. So big shout out to all four of you, Trent, Penelope, Perry and Andrew. Well done and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks again to our panellists. Thanks everyone for your participation today. So in the next 3 working days, you'll receive an evaluation survey accompanied by a recording of this webinar. We really appreciate your feedback, as it is extremely valuable to CPA Australia to help us deliver better events for you. Thanks again, and we look forward to welcoming you to another CPA Australia webinar soon.